Aaron Palermo discusses cybersecurity on the Azure DevOps Podcast.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Happy New Year and welcome to 2019. I'm your host, Jeffrey Palermo. You can go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes or past episodes. And our guest today is none other than my big brother, Aaron Palermo. Aaron is a DevOps engineer, solution architect, and all-around cybersecurity expert working for a global security services company. He's a member of the Cloud Security Alliance and is a co-author of the up-and-coming Software Defined Perimeter Specification version 2. And Aaron is at my home studio today. Aaron, Happy New Year. Great to have you on the show.
Happy New Year. Good to be here.
Now, for the listeners, we just had our kind of family gathering, Christmas gathering between Christmas and New Year. And so I have three brothers, and we all kind of done something in tech. Have a younger brother who's a Windows Server administrator working at Rackspace, and then the youngest brother kind of veered around, and now he actually is an engineer or a machinist working on weapon systems. But Aaron, you're here in the studio. You and I have lots of great conversations because our industries are kind of a Venn diagram. They have some good overlapping stuff, but just so everybody kind of understands what your background is, let's kind of go way back because you ran networks for the computer science department at Texas A&M for a while, right?
Yeah, I was senior IT manager at computer science and engineering at A&M for about 5.5 years, and prior to that, did autonomous vehicle research and network administration as a TEAS employee for the Brooks Development Office in San Antonio. Used to be Brooks Air Force Base. And then the autonomous vehicle research was for the DARPA Grand Challenge.
Yeah, the DARPA. I remember that was a long time ago.
That was a long time ago.
Have you kept up with the DARPA vehicles since then?
Not after the DARPA Grand Challenge was won, I think, in 2005. So that was the first one that was actually finished.
Someone actually completed it.
Several people. So Carnegie Mellon, I believe it was 2004. They made it about 7 miles, and then 2005, I think it was Carnegie Mellon had 2 Hummers. They both finished after Stanford finished in first place.
Now those were Hummer H1s, weren't they?
Yes.
Yeah, the real off-road military spec Hummers.
And one had very aggressive software, and one had more conservative software to make one go as fast as possible while ensuring that the other one actually made it. But Stanford, with I think a Volkswagen Touareg,
yeah.
And they had a lot of help from Google as well. They came in first and just handily trounced everybody.
The Touareg did.
Oh, yes.
So it's really not about the vehicle. Just you need a decent 4-wheel drive, and then it's all about the software and sensors.
Right. It's obstacle avoidance.
Yeah,
that's it.
Now, way on the simplification, and I kind of really appreciate my adaptive cruise control and lane keeping assist just in the regular car. I think that technology is coming along pretty well.
It's nice to have, and I definitely miss it on the rentals, but oh well.
So then for a good number of years, you did some really cool stuff with the Department of Defense and various. What can you tell us about that?
I worked for the Department of Defense.
All right, there we have it, folks. That's the full scoop.
That's it.
That's all we can talk about. But we have a lot of great experience of skills and techniques that you took away that we'll be talking about today.
Yeah.
And so you went away. You were stationed in the UK for a while. Now you're back in the States in North Carolina at Raleigh.
Yep. And work from home and enjoy it. I don't have to travel too much. And it's amazing how much you can get done when you're allowed to focus and don't have a ton of meetings and don't get interrupted.
A little bit bureaucracy. Federal government doesn't have any of that.
Well, I mean, just even the commercial office, if I go into the office, there's a lot more interruptions than there are at home when I'm there by myself, and the only meetings that I have are scheduled.
Yeah. And we have daughters that are within a year of each other. So my oldest daughter in middle school and your oldest one kind of been hanging out. They're actually hanging out at the house right now, having a good time. So let's get into some topics that the listeners would I think really find pretty interesting, because we have .NET developers running custom software in the Azure cloud, and even .NET systems running in AWS, and you can write all kinds of software with Visual Studio and with Microsoft technologies, and security is important for every single one of them. So let's jump into the first bit where you're a co-author on that version 2 specification for Software Defined Perimeter. For those who don't even recognize that term, what the heck is a Software Defined Perimeter?
I think that term was really coined several years ago, and it came out of some of the Forrester research around zero trust. And it's if you don't trust the machines that your users are using, or you don't have 100% trust in them, you don't necessarily trust the networks, you don't trust the transport from where your users are into your data center, how do you layer on or build up a certain amount of trust? And it's no longer a binary, do I trust this person or not? It used to be 20 years ago, if they're in the office, they have access to everything. Mm-hmm. You can go and you can view the MySQL port, or you can view the Outlook webpage, even if you're not allowed to access those services. But now if you can do that, and if there's an exploit, and if you can view enough services within a company, there's bound to be an exploit for something. So the software-defined perimeter takes the perimeter away from your IP address. It's no longer, is this IP address allowed to access something? Your perimeter is now moved out past your VPN, and is now based on your identity.
So if someone, for instance, is working from home, they're on their home grade internet connection, how does that affect that type of setup when they're, say, accessing the Azure portal, or you got VPN options if you go somewhere, VPN, or you can access cloud services directly. So how does that affect their situation?
So a lot of it functions from the user perspective as really a transparent VPN. So they authenticate once to their corporate backend identity provider. They're granted a sample token with several assertions, which gives them essentially whitelisted access to individual or groups of applications. So the easiest example is your HR administrator, the people that do payroll. They should not be SSHing to your Linux web servers, ever, unless for some reason they're also an administrator. So in that example, your HR users who mainly access web-based applications would have routes built for them to the applications or the group of applications that they're allowed to access. So historically, you've had your HR users, or your users in general, grouped by job functions. And now you pair that with all of your backend applications that should also be now grouped by function. So you have your HR grouped applications. You have your, say, your payroll grouped applications. You have your C-level grouped applications. And now you're going to grant user groups access to application groups. And that dynamically builds a one-to-one route so that the users can access the applications. No longer can the HR user do an Nmap scan of the entire network and see all the ports and applications and IP addresses that are listening and responding, and then possibly a malicious piece of software on their computer can then go and find an exploit for one of them. It really is a one-to-one route for just the applications that they are whitelisted to use.
Okay, so someone can do this manually by setting up firewall rules that are IP related, but this has some type of dynamic.
Right. So if it's IP address, you're now trusting that IP. You're not really trusting the user. With the software-defined perimeter, one of the requirements is a software-based agent that runs on your clients, and that agent is granted a PKI certificate that it uses to sign its access requests. So the way you get access to the software-defined perimeter, protected network or protected applications is step one. Before the user has any interaction, your client creates a request to connect to the network, signs that request, and then sends that request usually to UDP port 53, which is the DNS port. And that request is passively picked up off the wire. So it is not received in the traditional sense. It is not acknowledged. It is passively received. And then the signature is checked, the timestamp is checked, and some validation of the client is checked. So what's the geolocation associated with the IP address, what's the time of day, and a few other policy checks on the back end. So one of the easy things is if a laptop is stolen, or if a user is kidnapped and, say, taken to a foreign country, and you only allow access from within the US, you can check their geolocation of their IP address and block their access from that laptop. That's an extreme case, obviously. So what that does is, instead of granting IP and port access to everybody on the internet, you're requiring, one, the SDP agent to be running on the computer, a valid PKI certificate, and a time-stamped valid request to join that network. That authenticates the device to the software-defined perimeter controller. At this point, your software-defined perimeter client has no knowledge whatsoever that the network truly exists until, first, that packet is sent on UDP 53, passively detected. After that packet is verified, then the SDP controller opens TCP 443, which is HTTPS, so that a TCP session can be established. So your client authenticates via PKI to the controller. The controller then opens TCP 443 to your IP address for 10 seconds. At that point, the user credentials are passed as well as the machine credentials, and a persistent TCP connection is established. That TCP connection, every other flow rides over that TCP connection. So that is essentially your transparent VPN that is a dynamic route that all of your SDP protected traffic flows through transparently. So if you need to access, say, Exchange, you can go to, owa.mydomain.com, and your SDP client knows the route for that, and it can route you to Azure, AWS, Google, or your data center, because all that is transparent to the user, because your routes are propagated and created dynamically by your software-defined perimeter agent that's running on your device.
Okay, so that's a lot.
Yeah.
People are probably familiar with VPN. Does this complement VPN, or do you use this in lieu of a VPN?
This is a full replacement for VPN.
Full replacement. Okay, so it's a client that is installed on your computer.
Yes.
And I'm guessing in any smartphone device, any kind of network client.
Correct.
Okay, and does this create a network just to a data center, or can you have parts of that network exist in various data centers, various clouds? Anywhere that you have a publicly accessible IP address. It doesn't have to be open to the internet. It just has to be an IP address. Actually, it's not public. An IP address that you can route to, or your SDP controller not
can
a
route
private
to.
IP. Okay.
It can be a private IP. Say if you have, for Azure, if you have an express route, I think the term is, into Azure from your data center, or into Azure from wherever your SDP controller is running, everything can be private on the back end. Okay, so what are Cisco is a popular VPN. What are the products that are available now that people could use for software-defined perimeters? The leading one that is also part of the Cloud Security Alliance, I think the tip of the spear right now is Cyxtera. It's Cyxtera. They are doing a lot of pure software-defined perimeter. They probably have the most full-featured client. There are a lot of other companies And that is a product solution. So you buy it, you install it yourself. They have recently come out with a service offering also. Zscaler is starting to offer this as a service. Zscaler also does identity-aware proxy, which we'll get to in a little bit. Duo and Okta, historically MFA providers, they're also providing this type of service as a bolt-on to some of their identity-aware proxy. So it's really fun because identity-aware proxy, which is what Google BeyondCorp is, that is now merging with Software Defined Perimeter so that you can get the BeyondCorp functionality, but you're not just limited to web traffic and SSH traffic. You can do, you can do straight MySQL server connections. You can do actually any database, any client server application where you need access to an IP address and a port other than web is now going to be supported by the Software Defined Perimeter functionality that's going to be built into these clients.
So it sounds like you could take any network asset anywhere and create essentially custom subnets for any group of employees,
right?
And change it dynamically based on changing departments, access, as opposed to a VPN where once you get into the VPN, you're kind of on the subnet.
Right. And one of the big use cases for this is autonomous vehicles. So if autonomous vehicles, let's go into the assumption that they need to be secured so that anybody driving by them can't activate the brakes or the accelerator. This gives you a ring-fenced one-to-one, point-to-point connection that is fully cryptographically protected, that enables the device, which is the car, to talk to its back-end servers, and the back-end servers then also to talk to the vehicles, and then prevents any outside communication from breaking into that channel.
And we'll take a quick break for a message from our sponsor.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a software engineering firm and Microsoft Gold partner, empowering development teams to be their best. ClearMeasure equips developers with the DevOps tools, methods, and automation necessary to focus on building their applications, rather than wrestling with builds, deployments, or environments. Click clear-measure.com to see whether a DevOps implementation is for you.
And we're back with Aaron Palermo talking about security. And so with software-defined perimeters, in your opinion, many years ago, VPN was a new thing. But then at some point, it switched from being new technology that some companies were starting to adopt to now being considered malpractice if you did not use VPN for accessing, your corporate network from other places. So in your opinion, with this new method, which is a full replacement for VPN, where is it on the scale of some companies are adopting versus when it may or should be considered malpractice if you're not using this?
I think the line is kind of blurred because a lot of companies are also moving to software as a service. So if you use Office 365, do you require your employees to VPN into the corporate network before you can get onto Office 365? That answer is usually no. So what the software-defined perimeter allows is if you have administrators or privileged users, what would historically have been the intranet. The software-defined perimeter allows much more secure access from anywhere. I think as your workforce grows, so if you only have on-site employees and you have very few VPN users in the first place, software-defined perimeter is probably going to be overkill. If you have users that occasionally need to remote in case of emergencies, that VPN is not going to be as used as somebody who has a full remote workforce. I think the software-defined perimeter and the identity-aware proxy or the Google BeyondCorp, those are really best for the 100% remote workforce or getting to that level, or the 100% remote server environment.
Well, so many custom applications are put either on VMs in Azure or AWS, any cloud provider, or are platform as a service. Either they're running in the cloud and then limited from a networking perspective on whitelisted IP address ranges for their, what is myip.com so that people can say, hey, this is my IP of my house, and it typically doesn't change. So it sounds like instead of this list of whitelisted IP addresses for those types of applications, where it's not software as a service, it is a cloud application, but it really doesn't need to be, the login page does not need to be open to the world. It sounds like this might be a good solution.
Right. So I would say that the use case that SDP really hits on is if you're trusting my IP address, you might also be trusting, say, every smart plug in my house and all the firmware on that, because it's all coming out of the same IP address.
Right.
I mean, personally, in my house, all that's isolated onto its own separate layer 2, its own VLAN, but its public internet address is still going to be the same one that same single IP address that I have. Mm-hmm. So if you're now trusting, if you're whitelisting, which is dangerous, all my Amazon devices, all my Google Home devices, all my smart plugs, and who knows what the firmware is and when it was last updated. That's, for me as a CTO or a CISO, that would be pretty scary.
Okay, so from a recommendation perspective, we might whitelist an IP address with the assumption that there's only a handful of tightly controlled computing devices coming out of that IP address, and they're all tightly controlled by the employee who is associated with. In today's world, with the Amazon Echoes and all those smart plugs and the Ring doorbells and everything, it's all smart TVs. I just looked at our list. We have 60-something devices. You probably have twice that. And that's a good point. So in this case, would a software defined perimeter be an absolute recommendation for those people working from home when accessing anything that's not software as a service?
I think so, because it completely eliminates the risk of credential harvesting. Because if somebody gets a username and password, that is almost worthless, because you don't have that PKI certificate to sign the credential request so that your device can then connect to the network, so that your user can then connect to the network. And that is where moving your perimeter all the way to the device to almost a hard token, the PKI that's associated with the device, and requiring that before your users even type in their password. That's where, if a device is lost, if the user isn't also lost, then you just write that off as a device loss.
Okay. So with anything, there's likely to be a whole spectrum of options. For the enterprises, they're a highly complex environment already. But for the litany of startups and for the mid-market companies, which one of those products you listed is maybe more approachable or easier to get started with for the smaller organization?
From what I've seen, I would say Zscaler and Cyxtera are probably the two leading options out there. So Cyxtera definitely led the pack. They've been in the software-defined perimeter space for several years. It used to be CryptoZone. It was a European company. They were acquired by an American company, and they were product only. They've recently branched out to product and service. So it's really nice is if you have an SSO provider, say Duo or Ping or any one of the common SSO providers, you can call up Cyxtera, say, hey, I want to buy your service, point them at your SSO provider, and you can be up and running in a day or two. It's going to take a little bit longer than that if you want to do it yourself and you buy the product, you implement the product in-house. What I see with the software as a service or the software-defined perimeter as a service, pros and cons there. It's really easy to get ramped up, but then on the other hand, you're now trusting a external entity with your software-defined perimeter controller, which means it's almost like outsourcing your VPN controller. Would you do that historically? Maybe not, because it allows everybody access to your internal network. In a cloud-centric environment, that might be more appealing and more palatable to people.
Okay. You mentioned SSO provider, and so most common ones are Google and Office 365 and a few others. And there's definitely some things to think about there with multi-factor authentication and how to actually keep your credentials and whatnot. What for people who are even thinking about their own accounts, which any person today probably has just a list and list and list of accounts now and different kinds of passwords. What are some things that they need to be doing to keep those things secure?
The biggest one, obviously, is use a password manager. Don't reuse the same login and password everywhere. A bad example is if you go to, say, a mom and pop hotel and you create an account and you use the same login and password that you use for your bank account, and then that mom and pop hotel gets hacked and your credentials are there and their credentials are the same one you might use for Twitter and Gmail and everything else, then your entire identity could now be compromised. If you use a password manager, like online, there's LastPass, 1Password. If you want online standalone, KeyPass is one I use personally. That allows you to very easily create a different login and password for every single service, and that's what I do. I never use login with Facebook, even if it's an option, or login with Google. I create a new login, usually a new email address, and a new password for every single site.
Usually a new email address.
So
with the plus option?
No.
Okay.
So I have catch-all. So I have several domains that are sort of either personal or throwaway domains. And say if I register at cloud provider ABC, then I'll use cloud provider ABC at mythrowawaydomain.com. So it's a very, very easy way to associate any spam email address or any spam email or any trash email or any hacked email or phishing email that I get. If it's at cloudproviderabc.com, cloudproviderabc at mythrowawaydomain.com, I know where that email address came from. Either if it was sold or hacked or some other way compromised, then I know that can be blacklisted from then on.
Okay, so that's what you do personally. Now,
Yes.
in a corporate stance, if you're signing up for or being granted a software as a service account, people typically have one email address for work. On the corporate side, what should people be doing on that front with the software as a service accounts?
In that case, your options are use a strong password, use a password that you don't use anywhere else, and use strong multi-factor authentication. So Duo, Okta, Symantec, VIP, those are all apps you can run on your phone. You can also use YubiKey or a hardware token that you actually plug into your USB port, and you actually have to press a button when you log in to ensure that you are in possession of your hardware token and there's a human on the other side of that. So it's you. It's not necessarily you, but somebody is in possession of your token and pressing the button while trying to use your credentials.
So with the multi-factor, the basic premises have been authenticate with something that you have and then authenticate with something that you know. And it seems like biometrics was catching on, but now it seem to have fizzled out. So in your opinion, what's the state of the art that people should be going to on multi-factor?
I would say probably the YubiKey, because it is truly something that you have. So a lot of two-factor authentication uses SMS, assuming that your telephone number is something that you have. Mm-hmm. Well, your telephone number is something that you have, but it's also something that someone else can have if they call up your provider and can social engineer the person on the other end of the line to transfer your number over to their SIM card.
Yeah, the assumption is that you have your phone and that the phone number is the only way to get to that phone.
Right. So if you get an SMS message, or if SMS is your two-factor and someone else can start receiving your SMS messages either via hacking or social engineering, then that two-factor authentication is now more a vulnerability than it is an asset.
I found it to be not convenient too. And I paid for internet one time on a flight because I really had to get in. And then it said, oh, we're sending it to your phone. I'm thinking, and now I can't even get into the account because my phone's not going to receive that SMS because I'm in the air.
Right.
And so for those who haven't heard of YubiKey or UTF, can you give us a rundown of what that is and how people could use it, how to get started?
So a lot of the justification for using a hardware token, it comes, again, out of Google research. They adopted the YubiKeys, I believe, about 2 or 3 years ago, maybe even a little bit more than that, across the entire company. So a lot of users, a lot of devices. And their published research said over the course of from 100% adoption of YubiKeys or of hardware devices, hardware tokens, they have had 0 successful phishing attempts, which that's pretty huge. If I was a CISO and I heard of some technology that could 100% eliminate phishing, I would probably look into that.
And so before they had a good number of consistent phishing successes.
I don't think they published that number,
of course.
But they went from less than perfect to perfect.
Yeah,
and whatever that that delta is I don't know if that was published. I'll have to look into that.
Well, that's good to know that they were seeing phishing attacks being successful with other methods of two-factor authentication.
Right.
That's huge.
And at this point, Google is now also selling their version of YubiKey. So they're selling a Google branded hardware token that uses the same standard, but is not obviously the YubiKey.
And those are $40, $50 on Amazon for the branded YubiKey.
Right.
And then there's also an $8 one that I've seen that's just absolutely no frills. Kind of like a project, printed circuit board USB with a little button on it, like no case whatsoever.
Interesting. I haven't seen that one yet.
I think it was someone's project, and then they started selling them, and people started buying because they're $8,
right?
And if they work and they're $8, I mean, on the corporate side, you're probably going to go with a little bit more trusted brand. But for people just experimenting or on a budget, the lowest I found on Amazon was $8, and then the UBs are 40 and 50. Is there a brand that you use more than not?
I personally use YubiKey. A lot of our customers are still using the hardware RSA tokens or even the software RSA tokens that run as an app on your phone.
Yeah.
Where you type in the extra digits on your password or after a PIN number. But the YubiKey definitely gets around all that. And I think it's a lot easier to use from the user standpoint.
Okay. Exactly. You're right. If someone's account gets compromised, and I had a old Yahoo account that I had pretty much stopped using, and so I'd never enabled two-factor authentication. It had just been around for a while, and then I think you forwarded me an email that you had received from my Yahoo account, and so I just totally ignored that account. But now it's much more secure, and I've kind of done a sweep. But you got the corporate assets, but then every individual person has a huge list and growing list of accounts that any of them may be compromised. And everybody has Wi-Fi at their house. You've done some presentations on Wi-Fi security as well. I think everybody would benefit from knowing what the vulnerabilities are of their own Wi-Fi network and what they should be doing to harden it.
So probably the number one is use a strong password. So don't use Spider-Man or Superman or so an easy to guess word like that. Something that's going to be in everyone's word list. Use something that is unique, maybe even unique to you. Use a long passphrase, uppercase, lowercase numbers, special characters. So definitely use a strong password. Either write it down or store it in a password manager. Sharing it with all the devices that need to be on your network is fine. But if it's Spider-Man or Superman or Sunshine or just any common word like that, anybody that drives by and can sniff your wireless network, which is pretty much anybody that can see your house, they can capture a handshake from any device on your network to your access point. They can run the standard word list against that hash that they just captured. And if it is a common word like Spider-Man, Superman, Sunshine, then they can crack it in, well, depending on the size of the word list, less than 10 minutes. If you're just using numbers in your Wi-Fi password, especially if you're using something easy like a telephone number, then that can come down to about 45 seconds to crack a Wi-Fi password.
Because the first 3 digits are eliminated by area code. And now you only have 7 digits that are likely to be there.
Well, it's really, if you're going through every area code and every valid permutation of a telephone number, then you're looking at it's no longer a 10-digit number.
Yeah.
It's significantly fewer numbers than that. Even if you're looking at every valid area code and every valid permutation of a telephone number.
Because we don't have 1,000 area codes.
Right.
Gotcha.
And everything, all the telephone numbers that start with 911 are not valid. All the phone numbers that start with 411 are not valid. So you can throw a lot of them away right off the bat.
And I think all the ones that end with 555
or start
with 555.
Right.
Yeah, there's a whole list of those. So you've done a few presentations that people can see independently, off offensive Wi-Fi trolling and tell my Wi-Fi I love her. Just to seed those two, and we'll include links in the show notes. What were the premises of those two?
The first one was really to show that you could use wireless access point names as just trolling people. So I was at a security conference over in England, and Scott Helmy was one of the presenters. Great guy, presenting some really cool research on Nissan Leaf hacking. So we were at the bar the night before the conference. We were hanging out. He was there, so I decided to set up a rogue access point with Scott buy me a beer. And then that quickly spiraled into the following year, bringing a Raspberry Pi. There's a Pi Zero W that was running off a USB cell phone charger, battery pack. And it would run for about 20 hours. And I had it cycling through a lot of different access points. And then quickly realized that, at this hacking convention, a lot of people were working towards getting a hit on a website where they could deliver an exploit. And if I was using an access point that changed names every 5 seconds, knowing that captive portals knowing that phones would immediately connect to, say, McDonald's or AT&T Wi-Fi or Spectrum or a common network they had seen before that they remembered, that's expected to be insecure, they're immediately going to connect to this. And with just a couple of lines in the DNS mask config, I was able to set up a captive portal. And what's scary about that is that immediately launches a web browser on Android, iOS, and Windows. So if you want to launch a web browser to deliver a payload exploit, what easier way than to set up a rogue access point that is recognized, a device that immediately connects to that access point, pulls up a web browser, and views whatever content you want to serve it.
Okay, so...
And then exploit delivered.
Now, are you recommending that everybody immediately go on their phones and disable the automatic connection?
Yes.
Good. All right.
Except for your home network.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. And so that was the Tell My Wi-Fi I Love Her, right?
That was really the Tell My Wi-Fi Love Her is...
Which is really tell my Wi-Fi love her.
Right. That is, how can I find, say, my phone or anyone else's phone inside my house if I know their MAC address and the only other piece of data I have is, say, 3 to 4 sensors in the house and the received signal strength from that transmitter to 4 different receivers. So it's pretty simple triangulation, or actually trilateration. The further a device is away, the lower its signal strength is going to be. That changes a little bit because orientation matters on cell phone antennas or on Wi-Fi antennas inside your cell phone. So if you're holding your screen towards an antenna, you might read, say, negative 25 dBm. If you hold the back of your phone towards an antenna, then you might read as low as negative 45 dBm. So you're going to have some variance. It's usually about 10 or 15 feet based on the orientation of the cell phone and the orientation of the antennas. But you can get, pretty consistent room level accuracy or door level accuracy if you have some sensors in a room or in a house and you know the MAC address that you're looking for. And this is really easy to establish, say, pattern of life, proof of presence, that type of thing. Maybe not exactly the steps they took around the house, but did I see the cell phone or not? What angle or what direction did it come in from, and where did it leave?
Okay. And this is a lot of great information just to be able to secure your own house, your own devices, the data. But all of us have laptops and phones and whatnot, and they could be stolen. And of course, what is the state of the art and the best recommendations for just keeping all of your data safe, much less software as a service accounts?
Probably the easy answer there is full disk encryption. So BitLocker for Windows. I'm sure Mac has what, File Vault?
I don't know. I use Mac.
You don't, yeah. And then Android, a lot of those come encrypted, and then all the iPhones come encrypted from the manufacturer.
Yeah. I do use iPhone. So I guess there's some Mac in there somewhere.
So definitely full disk encryption. That ensures that any device loss is just a monetary loss. It's not going to chase you down for the next 5 years with identity theft. It's just going to be, I lost a device, I replaced a device.
Yeah, but without that, you lose the device. Who knows what's on there? And
right.
Especially in the services world, if you have a document that a client emailed you and you clicked on it, now it's in your downloads folder. I mean, boom, you got something that's more sensitive than just pictures of your cat.
Right. Are you now violating NDAs, or do you have your tax returns? Are you now a victim of identity theft?
Right. So anybody that has customers that sends them a document, so you have BitLocker so that they can't get on what's on the hard drive. But then there's Dropbox is a hugely popular service, and Google Drive and OneDrive, where there's a drive letter and it's just automatically backed up to the cloud. What about backup services? What are things that people need to check to make sure that those things stay safe as well?
So for online backups, I definitely encourage people to use those. I used to use, personally, not professionally, CrashPlan, which they've now gone strictly to small business and large business. So I've migrated to Backblaze. What I like about both of those is they allow you to use your own password or your own security phrase as local encryption before any data leaves your computer. So you supply an additional encryption key.
So you don't rely on them for encryption, and if they're hacked, then people get an encrypted payload instead of your clear text files.
Right, absolutely. And that also prevents them from helping you in case you lose, any of your passwords. But at the same time, if you keep track of your encryption keys, then there's no way that anybody except for you is getting your software or your files back.
Okay. It's kind of like you have that problem if you have your own backup upon backup at your house. If your house completely burns down, you lose your stuff. So then you're thinking, okay, well, now how do I solve that problem? And this is a way to solve that problem by taking your equivalent of an encrypted drive and just getting it offsite, but at the same time not letting that offsite player be able to read it in any case.
Right.
Okay. And for the corporate or business solution, is there a state of the art there, or is really everybody going to software as a service and then you just rely on those providers to do the backups?
Oh, and for your software as a service, definitely ensure that your provider is doing backups, and read the terms and conditions, read the fine print. For on-site backups, that really is probably a matter of policy and security decisions at the C-level. So do you still use tape backup? Are you willing to trust cryptography, which, we've seen historically that cryptography can be broken, has been broken. And at what point are tapes in your personal vault more valuable than trusting a possible security breach or cryptography compromise later? So that's really an internal policy and decision to have.
Yeah. I think one of the remaining issues with the software as a service file drives, Google Drive, OneDrive, even Dropbox, Box.com, is the organization and the need to know structure, because everyone's going to have an account. So if you have to think about multi-factor authentication, because if one person's account gets compromised, whatever they have access to, now that's accessible. But also, if you mentioned your HR employees versus engineering or sales or legal, if you have a drive or a folder that's too broad, then a one user may just have access to too much stuff, and maybe they don't use it and they don't care. But if that account's compromised and it has a big surface area, then that could be an issue.
Right. And I personally saw that when I was over in the UK. They had a very large ransomware outbreak. The NHS did, the National Health System. And it was based on shared drives and overly broad permissions. So if, I don't know all the details, but from what I saw in the news, it looked like if a nurse opened the ransomware, then it would immediately go out to the shared drive, and that over provisioning of access then encrypted everything and essentially removed access to those files from the people that needed them, because that one nurse or that one doctor, whoever clicked on the ransomware, then really just hosed everybody.
Yeah. Now, one remaining question that I think a lot of application developers are going to have is about single sign-on and the broad applicability of it, because it is getting adoption within the .NET development community, and that is building an application, and instead of building your own identity provider, trusting one like Google or Office 365 in order to log into the application. What's the state-of-the-art recommendations to balance ease of development while at the same time not requiring yet another username and password for those custom applications?
I might draw a distinction there between, say a identity provider that is strictly an identity provider versus an identity provider that is also providing you with an identity-aware proxy. So in that case, Office 365, I believe it's going to provide a binary yes, no, this person authenticated properly or not. Whereas on Google's side, you can log in with Google, and Google also has a worldwide presence of web proxies. So if you're providing, especially a Google-based service, through GCP and GCP, Google Cloud Platform, it does have an identity-aware proxy. So you can make those identity-based decisions at the entrance to the network, as far away from your application as possible, keeping that malicious traffic as far away from your application as possible, and also enforcing the identification and the authorization decisions, pushing those to the proxy, and then letting the proxy handle all of that, whereas your backend application really only has to deal with the decisions that are specific to it.
Okay, so you're not recommending not using the single sign-on providers?
Correct.
Okay.
So I personally don't use those because I have I guess it's just a sick curiosity of who's going to get hacked and when, and I want to know about it.
Yeah.
So if I'm using, mom and pop hotel at mythrowawaydomain.com, when that does get hacked, and it has been hacked, then I can just blacklist those emails from there on out. Or if I want to contribute that back to, other colleagues that I have in the security industry, then I can do that as well. Like, hey, this, say, well-known hotel got hacked, and I'm receiving these types of emails. You might want to incorporate that in your threat posture, in your threat list.
So it sounds like the scenario where if you go to some hotel website and it offers single sign-on with a Microsoft account or a Google account, not to use it, because you really don't. You want to do a transaction with that company, but you're really not wanting to enter into any kind of trust relationship with that company.
Well, and to be clear, that definitely does not give the vendor access to your Gmail or your Google account at all. It just authenticates you. So that's, I don't want to peddle fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So that really just authenticates that you're a person who has access to this Gmail account. And that's fine. That's a perfectly legitimate use. But in the case where you might not want the company you're registering with to have your Gmail account, because if everything forwards to your Gmail, but you don't want everyone to have your Gmail account, your actual primary account,
Right.
then don't sign in with it.
And it's kind of interesting that it seems like the software, the single sign-on vendors are all tied to email service providers, as opposed to just a single sign-on provider that's the service.
But I would say that Ping, Duo, and Okta are probably the three that I could point to that sort of fall outside of that. They're primarily a multi-factor and an application access. So if you ever use Ping, you just have, once you log in, you have tiles of, here's your Confluence, here's your Outlook, here's your HR application.
Nice. Well, that was a lot of information, a lot of great information applicable to software developers, but also anybody who has a Wi-Fi network, which is pretty much everybody. So are there any other resources that we didn't mention or things that people should do next to follow up on all this information about cybersecurity?
Tons. I don't have them on the top of my head, but I can email them to you so you can put them in the show notes.
All right, fantastic. So make sure definitely to check out the show notes of this particular episode, and for all of the programmers out there, which is most of this audience, really check into Software Defined Perimeter because it sounds like well into the future it'll be malpractice without using those, just because, like you said, the HR employees will be able to have access to more than they have a need to, and lots of devices on the network. And I think Amazon Echo and smart plugs and doorbells, we're only going to have more and more of those. And so, we can't trust the IP address. We really need to trust the actual identity.
Exactly.
All right. Well, Aaron, thanks so much for visiting with me. This was a great show. I appreciate it.
Good. Absolutely. Glad to be here.
All right. And until next week, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.